Hello and welcome to another modelling video. This is Alan from the Mokanaman at YouTube with another Q&A session. Last week we put up a video asking for questions. This week we are answering it with this video. Unfortunately, we got the dreaded yellow coin, not suitable for most advertisers. It will not reach all feeds. It takes more than a week to review and it will require 1,000 views, which is not quite possible. In future, if you wish to ask or contribute to one of these sections, the video is also uploaded on Facebook Mokanaman, and there'll be other elements put into place. Now, if you happen to watch my last vlog, unfortunately I've been having some trouble on social media. My old Facebook account, as well as public pages, groups, everything has been flagged and permanently locked, followed by a deletion via Facebook. This is the issue of having my entire social media presence on one platform, and I've reset up a new page in the URL below. You can also find it by searching Mokanaman. If you like that, you'll be able to see when I post things on YouTube that may not necessarily appear in your feed, as well as other shares, resources and pictures. It takes more than a month for a video to appear from when a model's finished, so you'll get a lot of content well before it reaches in video format. Keep an eye on these platforms, as a huge announcement's going to be made regarding a secret project I've been at and sort of hinting for many years. I think you guys will be very excited regarding the new course and level I'm going to achieve and try to tackle in the hobby. In my efforts to diversify where I post, announce and whatnot, I've returned to Tumblr and intend to put up my entire catalogue of built models, probably some highlight videos, and eventually just be a place to dump finished kits and work in progress pictures. And Pinterest, which mind you is a pretty awesome service for researching, and I highly recommend everybody have an account to get resources, inspiration, all that sort of thing from models, drawing, art, and especially if you're into history, costuming, equipment, a must. It's going to have a gallery of each build, some of the more serious work in progresses, as well as a portfolio, so just a place to see pictures to be pinned and share around and whatnot. Once these two are fully loaded and on a regular schedule, I will eventually look into Instagram, Twitter to expand in that, as well as a Google Plus account. That one is going to be a lot more important than you think, even though it's not going to get unique visitors. We'll explain that in the future if interested. Now for our monthly shout out. Gunpla Builder Stats approached me and wished to create a profile. What these guys do is create a little cool image of a modeler, their name, location, bit of a picture, and updating stats in a chart, a lot like a video game character or D&D thing, and outlines where they sit in the spectrum of the hobby in being a realistic or stylistic modeler, preferences in clean weathered, as well as where their focus of their abilities or the aspects of their work in painting, detailing, cleanliness, dioramas, extras, creativity, and all that. It's a pretty interesting way of looking and analysing popular modelers, or at least modelers with a public appearance and who are very regular contributors to the hobby in finished works, tutorials, reviews, or other aspects that share and promote the hobby. It all does come down to speculations and opinions, though it seems to be in good fun, good character, and just a great way of discovering other hobbyists in the hobby, and if the sort of things they do fall in the styles that you like. and giving you the ability to follow them, and just a nice database of cataloging just different profiles. Getting straight into it. Hey, is there a half-face respirator I can use for lacquer airbrushing that is found locally in Australia? Seems like the commonly recommended 3M 6051 filter is only available via international shipping. If you wish to pick up a organic vapor respirator that has a carbon filter and filters out both fine particles and all the fumes to prevent health issues, Bunnings carries the M3 range. You could go there immediately and buy it. They do lean to be on the pricier side of things. For my international viewers, Bunnings is a large hardware store chain, very famous for selling barbecued sausages. It's almost a national pride thing. In regards to the half-face 3M 6051 model mask, it's the current one I'm using right now. The old one did fail on me last year, though I have been operating it for several years, so that's completely understandable. The filter is very universal, can be purchased at Bunnings as well as online on the cheap, and the mask itself is fairly comfortable and quite affordable, strapping it to underneath the back of your neck and over the ears. Good for a gentleman like me with a beard. Highly recommended. I did want to talk about it in a honing your airbrush skills video, though definitely put the seal of approval. Have a look on Amazon or eBay. Searching in the way for shipping and product cheapest, you can practically find it for loose change if you're willing to wait a little while for shipping. Pro tip. First, this advice of using this respirator is for everybody, not just those in Australia. Secondly, it comes in a massive A4 resealable bag, a Ziploc bag. Keep and retain the bag. When the mask is not in use, store that in additional masks to prevent dust and debris building up. Once you start to struggle to breathe through it, or the seal breaks and you feel it going over your chin or face, it's time to replace the filter. Probably annually or something. Next question. Hi. How to use the Tamiya retarder or retardant? Is it only for hand painting? Thanks. A supplementary question on top of that, related to this question, is Mr. Hobby retardant basically the same as Tamiya retardant? I mean, chemically, of course. Now, I've played with both Mr. Hobby and Tamiya retardant. I did a video or covered them in videos in the past. Generally, it is an additive for paint and not really geared to any sort of style, method or application of paint. Retardant in the automotive or art world is a medium used in paints and finishes to slow down the drying time. This has advantages, especially for lacquers, where applied by airbrush, it generally dries too quickly and can orange peel, or if you're doing clears, fog up or cause issues with a glossy sheen, metallic sheen, all that sort of thing. The average advice is to apply about 5% to give you a few more minutes for the paint to remain wet before it starts to dry to a putty state. Generally, it is absolutely ideal with an eyedropper to apply a few drops into a airbrush cup or a small mixing tray when you're hand painting. For hand painting, and there'll be more questions about that later, it's very great for not drying out the brush and being wetter for longer for a smoother application. For airbrushing, it cuts down on orange peeling and other drying issues depending on your climate and temperature, especially when you're trying to achieve a gloss wet look. Some airbrushes have quite a bit of overspray and rough up the surface. If the whole surface is wet for a few minutes, then the that doesn't become a problem whatsoever. Now, in the way of the difference between the two, I've personally found that Tamiya is far stronger. You only need a couple of drops for a whole cup of paint in an airbrush, or one drop in one of those small trays when you're hand painting. Generally, if you use too much, which I have, the paint remains in a putty, sticky state forever, and that was a bad experience. With the Mr. Colour one, you can go a little harder or stronger, and the lacquers remain wetter for longer, though eventually it does dry, mature and harden no matter how much you put in. I find the Mr. Hobby stuff is a bit smoother and far more reliable than the Tamiya stuff, though the Tamiya stuff used correctly at 1 or 2 drops at a time will last you a very, very long time. Both products can be used in Tamiya lacquer, Mr. Hobby lacquer, any other lacquers including Mr. Paint or SMS or whatnot. I've also found that solvent-based acrylics, such as the Gunpla hand-paintable acrylics, the Tamiya acrylics, also react very well to it. Any polyurethanes, water-based enamels would not touch, could react very, very badly. There is retardant you can get for each type of paint. I was experimenting with a cheap bulk artist one and got disastrous results. So once that's a bit perfected, I can make content regarding it. Homer Simpson, find a new life and hobby man. This feels like 2012-14 all over again. Yeah, man, not gonna happen. The reply down below is pretty hilarious. Lee, a question from a long-time contributor. If I'm using 400 or 600 grit sandpaper, will airbrushing Mr. Surfacer 1500 fill in the sanding marks, or would I need to use a thicker primer for this? Mr. Surfacer 1500 is still fine to use, even though it is the thinner variant of the microfiller range. I would lean towards the 1200 or 1000 personally, though if you did your sanding with 400 grit and 600 grit wet lightly, followed that up with 1000 grit and 2000 grit, or 1500 grit and 2000 grit, polished it up nicely, Mr. Surfacer 1500 will fill in the scratches left behind by 1500 sandpaper. If you go a bit hard or harsh with the 400 600, the scratches may not necessarily come out at first, though if you're planning on having a surface reflective finish like a gloss or a metallic, the imperfections can be visible later on. It's all about preparation. You can go down the route of using a microfiller, or you can sand and polish to the point where the finish is absolutely universal on the piece. Sometimes it's an advantage to have a rougher surface and use a microfiller, such as resins and hard to deal with surfaces. On something like plastic where the lacquer likes to latch on, my preference would be to polish it up with more layers of sandpaper. Lon242, another long-term contributor. Sup Alan, a couple of questions. 1. I'd like to use Vaseline on my airbrush needle to help with a leak. One of the seals gave out and paint leaks into the trigger area. Where do you exactly apply the Vaseline here? I would think applying it too far forward. I would think applying it too far forward, like in the cup area, would be bad for the paint. Right. In the long term, the packer behind the trigger, which you can access with a screwdriver going down the back of your airbrush, exposes a white plastic-like long noodle washer. That needs to be replaced. If it's generally that part is very universal and can be scabbed out of a Heising or cheaper airbrush. You can still buy the component for probably about $15-20 off eBay. which is also the price of a very cheap airbrush. In the long term, you can lubricate the majority of the needle, wipe the front bit roughly to the trigger point, stick it in, allowing for the Vaseline to build up, and any remnants can be flushed out with lacquer thinner and sprayed out a couple of times. This should remove the material and the paint. Next question. Any tips on making fine grime and rust streaks on smaller kits like high grades and 72nd armor, I suppose? I find it difficult to keep streaks straight and keep the paint from washing out when trying to make the streak look right, especially on a smaller scale. What type of brushes and paints do you recommend? I've never really found streaking to work out with just out of the pot paint, and most people use streaking fluid or other weathering methods. I've played around on quite a few models, and I found them to be quite thick regardless what brushes I use, even the 4-0 fine tip. And generally the best results I've gotten from weathering pencils, the Mr. Hobby one, and I've been using makeup pencils of late, which I'm just about to write and make a tutorial about. I've achieved a few good models and been using it for about a year now. So pencils, you sharpen it to a fine point and you're able to draw on the lines you desire, white back axis or excess. A sharpener can build a point fine enough to your desired requirements. Now, things like washes, filters, overly thin paint is really good, utilizing a very fine brush. You can get the after image effect of streaks and grime marks. That's very, very subtle, and you can neaten that up with a finer brush by wiping back excess. Once that dries, and you can go over it with a pencil and have the fine point, and then it looks like it's bleeding out through the effect of the wash. Another one is also mixing pigment with a bit of white spirits, putting lines down, and then cleaning it up and making it really thin by cleaning the excess with a clean brush with thinner on it. A couple of ways to go about it, though the best results is mixing the wash streaks with the pencil marks, particularly makeup pencils. When I show my resin victory, you'll see the results. Hope you're doing well despite the rough spot you hit a while back. You got a fan here in Guam. Wow, Guam, that's a very remote location out in the ocean. Much thanks, and keep up the great work. Thank you very much, Lon. Unfortunately, things happen. It's not life-changing or anything that's too drastic that's cost me a family member or a close friend or any sort of loss of assets or anything. It's frustrating that the online aspect of losing a platform is quite stressful, and puts a lot of plans in disarray. Though they could be sorted out, and you just rebuild smarter, better, stronger, and you're able to overcome hardships like that in future a lot easier with things implemented. Hi, will airbrushing Mr. Surfacer 1000 be enough to fill light sanding marks, or do I need to sand it down again and or fill it with Mr. Surfacer 500? This completely depends on what you wish to achieve and the finish you're going for. Mr. Surfacer 500 is very harsh. It's something that you normally apply directly as a direct filler, or if you've got quite a bit of scratch marks from scratch building and more invasive activity that's happening on the surface of your kit. Now, generally, Gunpla is very famous and renowned for the molds and tooling to be quite heavily polished, to the point that the plastic does have quite a glossy sheen, and when you start cutting, removing nubs and sanding, you've got quite a dull spot where the nubs used to be. Simply continually sanding up grades of sandpaper, 300, 400, 800, 1000 grit, 2000 grit, whatever combination, as long as you're getting up to the 1000, 2000 grit wet, and giving it a good light buff and slowly removing the material at the coarser grit and a harder, stronger buff at the higher grit. Generally, 1000 grit should be more than sufficient to fill in the scratch marks. If you're unsatisfied, you can move to 500, though that depends if you're going for a high gloss sheen or if you're going for a standard matte or normal gloss. 1000 grit should be fine for a high gloss if you're sanding and polishing well enough that you're re-achieving the Bandai finish, or at least sanding everything over to get a uniform sheen. When hand painting with lacquers like Mr. Hobby or Tamiya acrylics thinner, with lacquer thinner, I'm having trouble. You and others have said to thin a lot and do multiple coats. But when I do the second or third coat, it always reconstitute the previous coat and I'm not getting the right coverage. Hopefully you know what I am trying to say and can give me advice. After the usual spiel about drying times and all that, I was told about 24 hours absolute minimum, and the potential of working with light colours, yellows, whites, that sort of thing. Lacquers as a hand painting medium has its advantages and disadvantages. Its biggest disadvantage being how quick it dries, or when you put control measures, how hot the thinners are, and the fact that when completely dry, it's very easy to completely reconstitute. In the picture I'm displaying right now is a miniature Zaku I hand painted, and with darker colours it's worked out really well, even though there are underlayers that might have been slightly reconstituted. When enough layers have gone down and formed together, we've got a very, very strong colour, and becoming reconstituted and drying again, it's self-leveled to a nice, smooth, semi-gloss finish. However, if you're using a primer, other layers of paint, and you're putting something quite light on top, it will blend together and show the bottom. Lacquers, as we've talked about many times before, dries very quick to the touch, in mere minutes to hours, matures very slowly. Even 24 hours, it has matured to its maximum. It's forever hardening over a long period of time. After a week, it's harder, a month harder, a year, it's probably going to get as hard as it possibly can. If you freshly paint lacquer and wish to strip it a few days later or a week in appropriate stripper, the paint lifts off immediately. Once you're trying to strip paint off a model that's years and years and years and even a decade older, it's going to be far more stubborn because it is properly baked, hardened on. The nature of the beast, lacquer reactivates and hardens again every time it's in contact with this thinner, and you do want it extremely smooth. It does work out well that way, and in other ways not so well. Two choices I can suggest after giving me the information and how you're unsatisfied with the finish. Allow further time for the paint to mature and chemically harden. Instead of 24 hours, see what a week does. That can be a very unreasonable amount of time if there's a deadline, you want it finished sooner, you don't have other projects on the go or whatnot. In the realm of a hand painting, maybe consider using a different medium such as enamels, and try that method again with a different type of paint on a larger surface. I really do love using lacquers via hand for fine detail, small surfaces, and especially metallics. Metallics beautifully dry brush and build up over many layers, and it appears to be smooth. Lighter colours I've struggled in the past, and generally will always jump onto a different type of paint and paint over that surface, such as acrylic or enamels. It's try something else. That's probably the best advice I could possibly give if you don't want to wait an absolute eternity. My apologies if I was not too much of assistance in that. My buddy Kamm. Hey Alan, hope you are doing well. Have you experienced hand brushing lacquer paints? Oh, shit. And if so, any tips? Personally, I've only ever used acrylic paints, but looking to other types for the future. Cheers. As we've heard from the other questions, lacquers is a completely different experience and does give completely different results. It's good to have multiple types of paints at your disposal to get different results. I do use a bit of lacquers for hand painting fine details, darker colours, and especially metallics. Dry brushing a metallic part really brings out a nice sheen and natural metal look. Wright YouTube channel is a very good resource. He does a lot of weathering, hand painting, blending, dry brushing, using the heat of lacquers to his advantage to blend it all in for that Mushroom Krieger interesting look that he's done a while ago and still doing on some Gundam stuff. A lot of his videos are tutorial by nature, and the channel is called Paint on Plastic. So definitely look at that. The biggest key to remember with lacquers is it is the only class of paint that can dry absolutely fully and hardened to a solid state, and with the introduction of lacquer thinner, reconstitute it into fresh paint as if it was still in the jar. Acrylics enamels, when they harden and dry, they chemically change and they can be stripped off, but they never return back into paint. This is advantageous if the surface doesn't look too crash hot. You add thinner and it self levels. You could do it to improve the finish. You can have colours underneath and bring them forward for interesting effects. This can also ruin a finish if you're not exactly wishing to achieve that. You can control finally how quick or slow it dries with the introduction of retardants. Or, when quite thick, dry brush it and allow it to create streaky effects. Leaving it a small amount out will dry it out and give it different consistencies, and when you want to refresh it, you just add more thinner and throw it back into the jar. My method for getting a smooth finish is over mixing thinner and a bit of retardant to a small body of paint, brushing it on smoothly in a perfectly wet state, allowing it to dry, harden, looking marbled, and seeing the undercoat. Allow that to fully harden, apply the next coat and another coat and another coat until the layers build up and you got a absolute solid colour. Another cool trick is when you've done hand painting, load a little lacquer thinner in your airbrush, drop the PSI, and finally mist it on the surface where you've hand painted. It will ever so slightly soften up and constitute to a flatter surface, getting rid of any lumps, bumps, and streaks, if there is any. As always, highly recommend to check out Kamm's channel and content. He's one of my most favourite builders, has a very interesting scratch building as well as modification style. Next question, Noel. Hey Alan, I have some older painted kits that I want to repaint. I imagine dipping the parts in thinner would melt or weaken the plastic. Any tips on how to safely remove lacquer paint from older kits? Thank you. This must be the crazy lacquer special or something. Pretty funny. Generally, lacquer is the easiest paint to strip off. That is correct. Thinner is very corrosive and dangerous to plastic. It will melt, soften, or change the compounds of the plastic where it becomes more brittle. Would not even dip for a second. There are other chemicals that react to different type of paints. Two very popular alternatives are bleach liquid bleach or gel bleach, which is preferred, and brake fluid. These are slower reacting fluids, and they break down, soften, weaken paint, though they are absolutely gentle and fine on polycat material, clear plastics, as well as plastic. Generally, it will not damage, soften, weaken, or do much to the plastic. Soak the parts for several hours to 24 hours in bleach or brake fluid. Pull out, see if there's any difference. Scruff it up with a toothbrush, run under running water, and soak again. This is a much slower process, and depending on how hard the paint, how many layers, how well you painted it, and if you covered every surface, will depend on how long it'll take for the paint to strip off. Most of the time it's a day or so, especially when it's fresh. If you've done a very good job, it could take longer than a week, though no harm is going to come to the plastic. I do recommend my stripping your paints off Gunpla video with liquid bleach. That will give you more information, as well as evidence that all the parts came out perfectly fine. And then you'll be ready to rock and roll. Thank you for the question. Final question from Anonymous. This was not left on the video. How to do candy painting? I've seen so many different combinations using different types of paint, acrylics, lacquers and enamels, and it's becoming very confusing. He also confessed to following my content and enjoying it. Here is a quick promised rundown on the candy effect application and purposes. Candy painting or candy effect pretty much means the spray application of a coloured clear paint over a surface to give it extra sheen, gloss, and that clear paint leading to what's on the other side, being transparent and showing the base coat for various results or meanings. The most common undercoat is silver or chrome, and you get a very reflective metallic colour tinted effect, such as your Sananjus and special coatings, reds, blues, yellows, all that sort of thing. There is a very complicated method where at various stages many things can go wrong. However, it's a very good method to test your paint skills, your paint knowledge, your product knowledge, and put all of that to the test to see that you could pull it off and achieve the ideal high, deep, gloss, coloured sheen reflecting what's ever underneath. Canning effect can also work in freehand shading and matte effects as well. Absolutely never be afraid to play with the undercoat. It doesn't have to be silver, it can be gold, it can be a flat colour like black and white in the picture, multiple colours, masking, camouflage, or a marble effect. Though I believe what you're looking for is the traditional silver and then a colour on top for that maximum metallic sheen effect, candy on chrome. If applied by airbrush, the most obvious and popular method is lacquers. First you do a fair amount of prep work, you sand polish the surface, apply a microfiller primer, and you've got a nice gloss base to sit on. Put down gloss black, inspect the surface. If it's all good, you lay down the highest quality, best sheen lacquer chrome you can get your hands on. Alclad, SMS, the high sheen stuff by Mr. Colour. They all work very well. Thin it down appropriately, spray it on for the best results. Now at this stage, if you use too much thinner and the coats are too thick, instead of having each layer independent and reflecting what's underneath, it's going to melt together and bring the bottom coats to the top. A wet coat is good as the paint's not orange peeling and you'll have a nice gloss finish. Going too thick and it's going to dull. try to find that nice even amount of coverage, which isn't too hard, though to be absolutely safe, once a coat's been applied, primer, base coat, top coat, allow the most amount of time as you can afford to allow it to dry and chemically harden. The absolute minimum between coats should be 24 hours. You can go a bit sooner, but risks are arise. Once your chrome base is absolutely dry, hardened, looking nice, you get a clear color, lacquer base as well, but you can dial it down to another type, an acrylic or an enamel, and spray that on top. Once you've put a lesser solvent paint, the final clear coats and everything on top need to be the same type of vehicle, be it enamel or acrylic. Putting lacquer again on top can cause effects such as cracking, distortion, and some sort of undesirable damage. What is really effective in the modeling world way back when Alclad was the top paint would be you would go enamel or lacquer base black, lacquer chrome, and then an enamel candy effect. Allow that to dry, clear, allow that to dry sufficiently, a few days, polish it and use a cut and polish and all that sort of thing. You've got a beautiful sheen. Best chance of getting the best metallic is always using a lacquer. You can switch it up and use enamel for all three stages, and that can yield good results. But due to how slow enamels dry, between coats, not to reactivate each other or cause damage, is a very, very long time to wait, and enamels just don't flow as well through an airbrush as lacquers. So you're going to be a bit more mindful to get that nice smooth gloss, lint or disturbance free finish. And when your enamels are wet, they're going to be wet for a lot longer, so there's chance for dust and whatnot to settle, so that needs to be polished out much later. That does need to be considered. The final method is acrylics. Most people looking at Gunpla, Tamiya. They've got some nice metallic paints. They've got some nice candy effects. So as a quick summary, best results would be a lacquer gloss black, drying time, lacquer metallic, chrome or whatnot, sufficient time to dry. Then either lacquer candy, gloss clear, enamel candy, enamel or acrylic clear, or acrylic clear and acrylic top coat after that. Best results would be a lacquer candy or an enamel candy. Try to avoid the acrylics, as they are the hardest to control for the best finish. Removing as a process of elimination the other types, it's alright. Where to me is really good if you're painting tiny little light lenses, they're pretty good by hand. Large surface by airbrush, not so much. This pretty much concludes the Q&A section part of the video. Thank you very much for watching. Especially thank you to everyone that contributed or got this far, got their answers checked in. Just because I do a Q&A session doesn't mean I'm not keen to help out. I do read all my comments, look at the comment section, and lurk in the other areas where I've got a presence, no matter where I am or what I'm doing. If you approach me, I'm happy to help one-on-one in a quick, friendly manner, or at least throw some references your way. If you do enjoy this whole community interaction element, we'll be doing this again next month. For those in Australia, I am underdoing a fundraiser where I'm selling hobby tools, airbrushes, all that sort of stuff, bits and pieces that I've reviewed, recommend, tested thoroughly for a greater project. My little hobby shop's called the Salt Mine Hobbies. There's a link to Facebook where that's at. all sorts of interesting bits and pieces. Got a couple of sales on the go. This is a part of the big announcement that I do have for next week, and just check it out and see what you think, only if you're obliged to do so. I also have a whole Patreon thing at the very bottom of the description section among all the links. Everything that goes to that at the moment is also funding the big project we've got going. I'll also have a very cool opportunity for my international viewers coming up soon, so definitely stay tuned for that. Thank you very much to everyone for your support and everything. Don't really want to do these shilling things too much, though I assume people who are keen will stay to the end of the video, and if you're not into this, just bomb out. Don't really want to pollute the content or anything. Catch you guys next time. Thank you.